everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Woolforth. I'm from the Dickey Center for International Understanding, your hosts for this afternoon's presentation. We are very proud to be able to offer Steve McCurry to you this afternoon as part of Dartmouth's Year of the Arts initiative, which so far this year has been stupendous, brought in wonderful things that we don't normally have on campus, so we're happy to play along with that. As someone who has yet to master taking photographs with my iPad, you will be relieved, as am I, that I am not introducing our speaker this afternoon. Rather, in the playground spirit of it takes one to know one, we have asked another iconic photographer to do the honors. James Nachtwey is at Dartmouth this year as the Roth Distinguished Scholar, and he holds that position as the inaugural scholar and will be here all year. In that capacity, he's been visiting classes, working with faculty, and is currently co-teaching a class in film and media studies with Professor Mark Williams. He also will be doing the odd introduction for other iconic photographers, so we're very delighted that he's here. So without further ado, let me turn the microphone over to photographer James Nachtwey to introduce photographer Steve McCurry.
It's a pleasure to introduce my good friend and esteemed colleague, Steve McCurry. And I want you to know how lucky we are he's actually here. I can't get him on the phone, let alone get him to New Hampshire. His accomplishments are so numerous and varied, it's hard to know where to begin. For more than 30 years, he's forged a vision that has made him one of the greats of contemporary photography. He hails from Philadelphia, went to Penn State as a film major, worked for a local newspaper, then struck out on his own for India, living out of a shoulder bag and traveling by bus. He met some Afghan refugees in Pakistan who smuggled him across the border, where he was the first international journalist to document the war between the Mujahideen and the Soviet Union. He's gone on to a brilliant career with National Geographic, is a member of Magnum, and has produced over a dozen books and countless solo exhibitions worldwide. He's received the Robert Capa Gold Medal for Courage and Enterprise, the World Press Award, and been named Magazine Photographer of the Year, to name just a few of his accolades. As you're about to see, his work is hard to categorize. I had the honor of being asked to write an introduction to one of his most stunning exhibitions held in Milan a couple of years ago, and I'd like to share it with you. McCurry, man, how does he do that? What do you even call it? Photojournalism? Documentary photography? True enough, I guess, but the words sound pretty dry when you're looking at the pictures. I don't know, painter? Closer maybe, but then again, he does use a camera, right? He must be out there in another realm, sending back dispatches from the other side of the looking glass. Mythmaker? Dream catcher? Yeah, that's more like it. Like his imagination is a force of nature. Like the light emanates from his eyes, infuses his subjects, and radiates back into his lens. I've seen that light in his eyes, and come to think of it, I don't look too hard at it. Maybe because it's so intense, I'm afraid of being blinded, like staring at the sun. Can the intensity of color blind you as well? A lot of practitioners who could more easily be categorized as photographers need something to be happening in order to make a picture. With Steve, the light is happening, and the colors are happening. Right, but then what about the figures? Did they step out of a time warp or a parallel universe inhabited by mythological gods or out of his own sublime dreams? Or does Steve walk into the dreams of the people in the pictures? The guy is hard to pin down, all right. At the risk of embarrassing him, maybe the only way to say it is he's an artist, and leave it at that. Let's welcome Steve McCurry.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jim. Actually, Jim and I met in New York about, 30 years ago. I was just about ready to go off to Lebanon during the Civil War to do a story for National Geographic. And Jim had actually already been working there for some time. So I called Jim out of the blue, and I said, could we meet? Let's get together for dinner or whatever. So Jim, actually, I don't know if you remember this, but you came over to my apartment, Sullivan Street in Soho in New York. And Jim very graciously, very generously, basically gave me all kinds of contacts and people to talk to and people to meet. And with that, we didn't even sort of know each other at that point, but it's unusual too for somebody to basically open up their Rolodex and give you all these sort of wonderful contacts. So, it's been great. Our paths have crisscrossed in places like the Philippines. We worked in Japan together on one of those photo projects. All sorts of places. So, all those awards that Jim mentioned that I have won over the years, actually, Jim has won those same awards maybe 10 times more than I have. So that's thanks for the, anyway. So he's talking about me being modest, he's much more modest than I am. So I have a presentation. It's great to be here at such a distinguished university. I'd like to go ahead and just start my presentation. I left my university experience. I left there and basically went to work on a small, obscure newspaper outside of Philadelphia, which was kind of a humbling experience because I had all these sort of dreams about working and doing great, essays and photo stories, and to kind of start off my photography career shooting check passings and Chamber of Commerce and women's clubs was not exactly the way I wanted to, what my kind of ambition was. So after a couple years of that, I decided to save my money and go to India and just travel and shoot and let the chips fall where they may. So that's basically what I did, and then I just never looked back. I went from those 2 years of living in bad hotels and going by bus. In fact, coming up on the bus yesterday from Logan Airport was sort of a flashback to being on all those bus trips in India. It was, I thought, what am I doing? This is bringing back bad memories. No, I've traveled much worse than that, believe me. Anyway, let me go ahead and start my presentation. So if we could kind of dim the lights, I wanted to go ahead and jump into this. The first picture I wanted to show you was actually when I first was a student, I went to Mexico. This is one of the first pictures I made as a young photographer. I got a camera in September of 1972 and went down to Mexico the next month, and this was like one of the first pictures I made on my trip. And I just, I think for me it's one of my favorite pictures, in fact, because here's this display, this furniture store with this kind of wonderful display, and there's this homeless man just sleeping on the street underneath that sofa, which is in the picture window. So this was, then from this picture to this picture is a gap of about 3 or 4 years where I worked on this newspaper, and I don't know if you've looked through your archive, Jim, from that newspaper era, but there was really, really slim pickings from, but it was kind of a way to, it was like an apprenticeship, I would say, and a way to sort of get into photography and looking at light and composition and telling stories with pictures, and also going into a situation and having to work rather quickly because you get to a place and you have to kind of size it up and work fairly quickly because on a newspaper such as I worked on, you're on to the next assignment in the next sort of few minutes. So in 1978, I went to India, and found my way shortly thereafter to Afghanistan. And I was staying in a cheap hotel in the mountains near the Afghan border, and these Afghan refugees said, there's this war raging over the mountains, and we want you to come in and basically report on that, to photograph it, and to tell the world what's going on. So against my kind of better judgment, I went with these guys who I didn't really know, and I didn't speak Pashto, and they didn't speak English, but I decided, what the hell, it seems like an important story. I just want to kind of go for it. So this is a picture of these, they were called mujahideen, sort of holy warriors, and they're looking at a road down below and sizing it up and deciding if they should attack. So I was with them for about 2 or 3 weeks, and made subsequent trips back maybe 30 times in Afghanistan. So this is some of my first pictures. In fact, some of the first pictures that came out of Afghanistan in the early days. There were other photographers, but not so many. It was really an untold story back in the 79, before the Russians invaded it at Christmas of that year. So these are just some of the fighters from that, and you can see these guns that these are old kind of World War I Enfields, and the way they're dressed is really much more traditional than you would sort of find now. And this is a young boy who's kind of made this AK-47 out of some old plywood. They get together, they have these sort of loya jirgas where they get together and they discuss strategy and what they're doing and where they're going and all of that. There were no bridges, so that in order to cross the river, they would put their clothes in these kind of goat skins, and then they would float across the river with their gun on their shoulder. So that was, they had captured this helicopter. They called back to headquarters and said, this is an army base, and the commander said, the helicopter's broken down, send us another helicopter. So in the meantime, the whole garrison of 300 soldiers defected, and this was one of the pictures that ended up in the New York Times, which actually really, in a way, launched my career. After this, my pictures appeared in many major newspapers and magazines around the world, and I would say that was the first, from that period, I ended up working for National Geographic. So the kind of fast forward, this is looking at some of my pictures from National Geographic. I did a story on 50 years of India's independence, which allowed me to travel in India for literally 4 months, anywhere I wanted to go and photograph anything I wanted to shoot. And so I just traveled around and photographed architecture, people. This was an amazing village. It's in Rajasthan, in a kind of a desert area of sort of western Afghanistan. And it's the whole, this whole part of the city is painted blue. So you really feel like the architecture and the color and everything really, you feel like you're kind of back in time. And these are some of the people that live there. I was walking through this village one morning, and I came across this one alley, and I recognized the kind of the design of the picture as people were walking in and out of this walkway. So I stood there for probably an hour and photographed people coming. There were cows, there were dogs, there were people with things on their heads, and I just kept photographing it. And eventually, when I was kind of selecting, I came up with this picture. These are, there's a festival called Holi, which in that time they do all this sort of pictures with hands and everything. When I was 12 years old, I was looking through Life magazine and came across this photo essay by a New Zealand photographer named Brian Brake. And it was just such a magical, all these pictures were so interesting to me, and I kind of pored over it. And it was a series of pictures which I never forgot. And I decided, when I actually started working for National Geographic, I thought, well, why don't I kind of reinvent Brian Brake's story on the monsoon? So I wrote a proposal to National Geographic, sent it in, and they gave me the assignment. So I spent kind of 4 months photographing. This is a picture of Brian's. This is kind of a pre-monsoon, somebody in the heat. And so I decided to kind of, in a way, get there early and spend 2 or 3 weeks, the heat and the dust and the wind and all that. So this was my kind of pre-monsoon picture of some women in a dust storm, huddled together, protecting themselves from the wind. I was in a taxi driving through the desert when this dust storm whipped up, and I suddenly rolled the windows up. I thought, I don't want to get my cameras, full of dust. And then as I was sitting in the taxi, I realized, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be shooting and doing the story. So then I got to really panic. I thought, I got to find something to shoot. So I'm looking around, and we're driving down the road, and suddenly I saw these women huddled together like that. So I jumped out. I ran across the field, made a few pictures, and then after some time, the dust storm stopped. Picture was over. So then, in this sort of monsoon phenomenon, which happens over much of Asia, then this deluge starts, and it rains, every day or all day sometimes. It just depends on the situation, but it's just a lot of rain. And I was at a stoplight in Bombay, and this mother and child came up to my window to ask for money. And I kind of instinctively made 2 frames, just 2 pictures. And I got back, set the film off, and 2 months later I'm looking through my film. I didn't even remember, literally didn't remember taking this picture, because it was just a kind of a reflex. And that ended up being the lead picture to the story, and ended up being on the cover of one of my books. So these are just some pictures from the water gets, when it floods, you can imagine the dirt and the life goes on. This is a husband and wife going to work, going to the market. It's Mark Twain in Portobello. Just sitting there watching the flooded street. This is a part of a monsoon festival in Kathmandu. I was on the other side of the river, and I was there for about 4 hours, and then a policeman came up and said, "You're not supposed to be here. What are you doing here?" So, you can kind of see the panic in this dog, who's completely freaked out that he's not going to get back in the house. And he's, this little teeny ledge. He's just, So that's me a long time ago when I had hair and a beard and all that. But doing the story was, you're in this water virtually the whole day. You get out on the street at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you're in this water. You go back to the hotel at night, and my feet would be like prunes, and I have to get disinfectant and all that, because there was all sorts of, dead animals, and you can imagine what else was floating around. And you never knew exactly where you were stepping, if you were going to step off of a curb or, into a hole or something. So you're always a bit off balance, wondering if you were going to suddenly trip and, get all your camera equipment wet. I saw this tailor. He was carrying his, his sewing machine, which he had salvaged from his shop. And so I was getting ready. I saw him coming toward me in the street. So I was getting kind of ready to, and all the neighbors and the people in the windows and the roofs started announcing to this guy that there was a foreigner that was going to take his picture. So I think he has a smile on his face because he's a little bit self-conscious or maybe felt a little embarrassed. But anyway, the picture ended up on the cover of National Geographic, and the company that manufactured the sewing machine actually tracked this guy down and sent him a new machine, which was kind of a great. I was really happy to be able to help this guy kind of indirectly. This is in Indonesia. Again, this village had been underwater for 3 days, and they had no place to go. This was their neighborhood. They could still kind of sleep above the water line, and so this was the girl that lived. This is her front yard, and this algae was on the surface, and I just asked her. I said, let me take a picture of you. This is the monsoon festival that happens during the monsoon in Bombay, India, and they take this image of Ganesh, who is this sort of half elephant, half human image, who's kind of a symbol or a god of good luck, and they take it into the sea, and then when they get out to a certain distance, they kind of just throw it into the water. So very interesting, and you can see that there's literally hundreds of thousands or millions of people that participate in this festival. So after I took this picture, this is just around sunset, I went down into the water to take some pictures, and the people in the front here, you can see this fellow with the red hat, he's looking at me. And they took objection to my photographing them, and I took this picture, and then they came and they literally attacked me, held my head underwater with my camera, which was attached around my neck, and completely ruined. I had an assistant with me. After we were thrown in the water, all my equipment was trashed, every lens, every body, and I went back to the hotel. I was able to salvage this last roll of film, and then they called National Geographic, and they said, "Oh, just throw all the equipment away. It's all, there's no way to repair it once it's been in salt water." I did another story with a friend of mine, Paul Theroux, the travel writer, and we went from Peshawar, Pakistan, to Chittagong in Bangladesh, and when I got the assignment, I wondered, having never really thought about it, I wonder if the train goes anywhere near the Taj Mahal, because that would be a really great image, having these two things juxtaposed, an old steam locomotive with the Taj Mahal. So the first thing I did was go down to Agra, and lo and behold, not only was the train track near the Taj, there was an entire railroad yard with lots of locomotives and cars. It was this very busy rail yard. So I was able to actually spend an hour or two over several days photographing. This was actually a shunting track, which went even closer to the Taj, where they would change the cars and the locomotives. We'd ordered tea in the morning, and the door was locked between the kitchen and the rest of the car. So my assistant said, "Oh, you're not going to believe this. They're passing the breakfast trays on the outside of the." So I kind of had him hold my legs while I leaned out of the train, thinking if this guy lets go of me, I'm toast because I was out there and they're very precarious. And I again just shot a couple pictures, but I always love this. So these are some pictures from the color got away from me on this slide. It's not actually that, but these are just some various pictures of the Taj Mahal. It's always difficult to photograph an iconic piece of architecture because they've been photographed so many times. So you're always kind of looking for a new way to do that and new angles. And this is a series on the disparity between the ultra-rich in India. This is a Maharaj with all these antique cars. And then you have this ultra-rich class, but then you also have this millions of people living on the street, eating, sleeping, everything's done on the street. And this is outside of a music store. And you can see the woman here is, starting to prepare dinner. There's a cottage industry, there's an industry called shipbreaking where they bring these enormous freighters up on the beach in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and you can see this big, enormous chain, and they just kind of winch them up on the beach, and within a month or two or three, this ship is just cut apart for scrap metal, and it eventually just disappears. But this, outside of Karachi, there must have been 50 of these old freighters just lined up on the beach. It was just really surreal. I was in India. This is a picture from 10 years ago, but I was at this festival just like 4 weeks ago. And it's happens in northern India on the Ganges. And on this one day, it was February the 10th, they estimated that, and this is an incredible number, 30 million people came to bathe in the Ganges on that one day. 30 million people. This is over several square kilometers. It's not in one small place, but it's a huge area. But there's people coming and going all over that 24 hours a day, and they take their bath. They believe that if they can submerge themselves in the Ganges, that it'll help cleanse their karma and it's spiritually beneficial. And these pontoon bridges were constantly filled over this whole 24-hour period. In fact, the festival lasts for, I think, a month or 6 weeks. This is part of the bathing area. And these holy men, they call them sadhus, they're in some ways kind of the main attraction because they have a lot of followers and people respect them, and they come and ask for blessings, and they're all have these dreadlocks, and they sit in these tents, and they run around. On the bathing day, they go from their encampment to the Ganges completely naked, and then they put ash on their body afterward. This man has had his arm in the air for over a dozen years, and that's part of his practice, his sacrifice. And you can see the nail, how it's kind of grown, but the hand is actually now permanently up in the air. It's just atrophied. This is not he's actually collecting money, He's has this thing like an arrow through the head. But these guys run around the Mela grounds, the fairgrounds, and this is part of the ritual. This is a long story. But they've actually, part of the initiation into to become a sadhu is they damage their penis so it can't become they can't get an erection. And they do these feats to demonstrate that. And there's they'll pick up some stones. I had this guy he picked up a pile of stones that must have been 30 pounds. And I don't have that picture here, but anyway, this is quite a bizarre situation. This is from 15 years ago, but when I was there, this is in the Ganges. These young children will sell these flowers, and they get up. They're at work before 6 o'clock in the morning, before sunrise, and then they're still working after sunset. And they're incredible, and they sell these offerings to people, and then they'll float them down the Ganges, the camel reservoir. This was all part of my 50 years of India's independence. So up in Kashmir, there was a shepherd who was living in this tree. And I was driving down the road, and I saw this fire in the tree, and I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I got out, I took a few pictures, and kept going. Calcutta is one of the, I think, visually richest cities in the world. It's just, there's so much chaos and confusion. It's just an amazing, these are old movie posters which used to be painted. All the movie posters in India were handmade, and then they would take them and by cart down to the cinema and put them up. It's a dance in South India that these apprentices, these kind of novice performers, they get there very early, and then they do these exercises in order to, because the eye and the facial gestures are very important in this dance. So these are young boys. When I was in Kashmir and I doing a story there, I saw these men selling flowers, kind of moving around the lake in the early morning, and I was so intrigued, and I thought this is definitely going to be a kind of an interesting picture situation. So every morning over the course of, I don't know, a week or more, I went out and I would travel with them around the lake and sit in the back of the boat for half an hour, whatever, and try and photograph this, waiting for the right light, the right sort of situation. When the Kodachrome was discontinued, maybe the best film ever made, I asked Kodak if I could have the last roll. Just thought, well, that could be an interesting project. So they gave me the last roll, and they actually did a documentary film on the project. And I was thinking, well, what do you do with the last roll of Kodachrome? You have 36 exposures. Where do you go? What do you do? So I decided I wanted to photograph in New York. I wanted to go perhaps to India. And I thought, what can I shoot in New York that's sort of iconic and something that's identifiable as New York? So I thought, well, somebody like De Niro or Woody Allen or Scorsese. So De Niro happened to be in town, so he agreed to be in the picture. So, and then I went to India Kodachrome was this vanishing film, and there's these nomads who had this kind of vanishing way of life. So I thought, Kodachrome is coming to an end, and these nomads, their way of life is coming to an end. So let me photograph this tribe. So this was a magician, part of the Rabari nomad tribe in Rajasthan. So I just, and that was pretty much the project. I was talking to Chris and Jim earlier today about, I have these themes. The first picture I showed you was that sleeping man in Mexico City, and I just, when I'm traveling around, walking around a place, I have certain things that I kind of look for that I'm attracted to. And one of the things that I find myself shooting over and over again is people sleeping. And so I just have this collection, just kind of random pictures of people sleeping around the world. This is a porter in the train station in Bombay, waiting for the train to come in, and he's going to carry the luggage. So this stray dog kind of came in and sort of is in that same position. I always got a kick out of this picture. That was really funny that you get this. This is in India. This is in Calcutta. It's a picture of Shiva on the wall, kind of sleeping, and then you have these. This is also Calcutta. I just like the color scheme there. This is Calcutta again. This is part of Durga Puja, these effigies. I never could understand how this guy could sleep on those on those pipes. It just seemed really uncomfortable. This is in Thailand. This is in Marseille. I gave this, after the story was published, I gave the picture to my agency. So eventually a French magazine was doing a story on illegal immigration in France, and they used this picture to illustrate their story. And this guy saw his picture in that magazine, and he sued, not the magazine, not Magnum, he sued me. So he ended up, went to court, and he won, I don't know, like $10,000 or something, so we had to pay him. But he was right. I mean, but it wasn't, I hadn't given the picture, it was my agency. But we still. This is in Sunset Boulevard in LA. Sunset Boulevard again. Thailand. This is outside of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. This is just a couple years ago. I saw this husband and wife, and it looked to me like he was dead and she was sort of grieving over his body. I don't know, I don't know if you see that too, but I thought this is this is a really interesting picture. I'm always very respectful of people. I'll never take a picture of somebody who doesn't want their picture taken, but I thought, they both seemed to not be aware. I started taking pictures, and the guy woke up and freaked out. He wanted to call the police, and he wanted the card and the camera. It got quite difficult. Anyway, he settled down after a while, and he was okay. So Zagreb in Croatia, Paris. So Tokyo late at night before they close the subway. Beijing. That should have been taken out. Jaipur. This is in a place called Brindavan in India, and I got so intrigued with this little woman, and I couldn't, the way she had this, she was old, she couldn't walk, she had this illness, and I started following her down the street, and after a couple minutes, she sort of saw me and my assistant, and so we started talking to her, and she actually turned out to be this really amazing woman. She had been a widow since she was 14, and it was her family had kind of sent her off to this town because being a widow has bad karma, it's bad luck, it's sort of a stigma. So she had lived alone in this town for now she was in her 80s. But she was so kind of generous of spirit and had such a fortitude and it was such a sense of humor that I thought this is really an incredible human being to have that sort of that misfortune in life, yet to still have a generous sort of positive attitude. Really quite a kind of a important, profound situation for me. Mandalay in Burma, Stations of the Cross in Lourdes in France. I love the juxtaposition between this old woman who's trying to kind of steady herself and then this child, the kind of the beginning and the end of life. Tokyo, France. Another theme that I kind of track, that I kind of find myself attracted to as I travel around the world, are couples. So this is in Mauritania. It's in Zagreb. Thailand. It's in a hospital in Uganda, an AIDS patient. I don't know what the story is here, but I don't know how that happened, but this is in Belgrade, Shanghai, Dublin, Madrid. Doesn't look very comfortable, actually, does it? I don't know how. Yemen. Kind of rare in an Arab country to see, this sort of public display of affection. Havana. Mandalay. I've been going to Burma for the last sort of 15 years. I find it the Buddhist culture I always find very soothing and a place I always love to kind of go back to. It has this really wonderful charm to it, which is quickly disappearing because the good news is that they're kind of opening up, but some of that old charm is. Back in the late sort of 96, I did an assignment for the New York Times on Aung San Suu Kyi, who now, of course, is released and part of the government, but she spent, a couple decades under house arrest. Really tough, elegant, and petite, but just really articulate and very determined to, get Burma back on the right track. This is kind of old Rangoon, this is gone now. They still collect their alms in the morning, but the building's been destroyed and there's a hotel there now. part of a initiation. I think this little monk, they put their morning ration of rice in this bowl, and he goes around and collects their morning. There's a part of Mandalay where they make these enormous Buddha statues. In fact, they make all kinds of Buddha statues, hundreds, thousands of them. And this one's been there for, I don't know, 10 years. And every time I go back, I always take more pictures of it. But it's, I don't know how many tons. It's made out of, this is a marble. It's huge. It must be 20 tons. This pagoda, the roof fell in, and it's actually, the statue is probably 8 feet tall from head to toe, but it's just almost another rain, and the thing will just be kind of covered forever. But I love the fact that no matter what sort of situation you put the Buddha in, he always has a smile on his face, you know. I mean, he can be completely covered with rubble, but he's still, you know, is persevering. This is actually a cement statue. It looks real, but it's a cement statue. This was a venerable monk from Rangoon, and his devotees will come and meditate, sit beneath the statue, and to pay their respects or whatever, they'll put a glass of water to his mouth, or I guess the guy was a heavy smoker, I don't know, but they'll put cigarettes up there. And they still do that today. If you go to Shwedagon and go around the side, you'll see people do this all day long. This is at a monastery in Mandalay. This is the national sport. It's amazing what they can do with that little ball. It's playing football. It's a beautiful monastery with this kind of wonderful color. This would have been the largest pagoda in the world. It was never finished. The king died, and they just abandoned the project. And then an earthquake created these fissures in the. It's all made out of brick. It looks like it's like a cliff face, but it's in fact all brick. But it's. This is in Mandalay. Yeah, that's it. This place called Inlay Lake, and they have this very unique way of rowing or paddling their canoe from the front, and this is their kind of method of paddling. It's a restaurant in Rangoon where they eat snake meat. This is the kitchen, and they make a kind of a liquor out of the blood and some kind of a local, moonshine. And they insisted that I drink some, but I told them I don't drink, so I was able to avoid that. But those brass rings are actually quite heavy, and they don't know exactly why, the origin of why they have these rings, but it must be very uncomfortable to live your entire life. They're able to disassemble it somehow to sleep. Part of it kind of disconnects, but it never comes off, ever. So Angkor Wat, I had done a magazine story, and then I did a book on Angkor Wat. It's this enormous sort of Hindu temple complex which is just, I was there before the tourism really kicked in. So you were kind of wandering around these temples and you're all alone. You really felt like you were, back in that time, or 99. Yeah. This was one of the groundskeepers. I saw this child on this little kind of makeshift hammock, and I stopped the car, jumped out, I ran over. I think I scared the kid because he looks like he's a little bit, But I loved his that hairdo he has, that haircut. That they offer money to the deities. This was in a like a tea shop in the middle of this lake where they're trying to attract tourists with their little menagerie of. They had a bird and a gibbon and and one of the animals in their collection was this snake, who lived with them, and just kind of was part of the household. So a series of pictures in Japan. I've been there several times. Japan, I love traveling and photographing in Japan, but I was there, I was on my way on a trip to Japan, and I decided instead of going and doing the work in Osaka, I would go up. Just after the earthquake and the tsunami, I went and actually went and photographed and spent some time up in this area. And it was just incredible. The whole coast was devastated, as you remember. And it just, these ships and this house, which looks like it's going to just fall over any second. This house, the only thing that's left is the whole thing was just wiped clean, right off of the. These were rooms here, and it's just gone. Cuba. We're still not allowed to go to Cuba. As a journalist, you're allowed to go to Cuba, but otherwise it's still off limits. I applied to go to Cuba, but my application was rejected, so I went anyway. I thought, I'm not going to not go just because the State Department says, Actually, to be honest, I did send the application the day I left for Cuba. But I thought, I explained who I was, what I was doing, and they said, it's not good enough. This is one of those odd moments we find ourselves in as photographers. I was walking down the village street in Peru, and I saw this child crying and with his toy gun, and I went over there to see, because his friends were tormenting him, and he was crying. We went over to talk to him and to see what was going on, and so he had this gun pointed at his head, and I took a couple of pictures, and then we said, we tried to find out what was going on, and then he just kind of ran off, and I can only hope that it was just kind of a momentary thing, and that it was his, they actually ended up, getting on okay. But it was just this weird kind of situation. This is also in Honduras. It's from Lebanon in 1982. This is the period where Jim and I were working over there around the same time, and there are all these militias and the Syrians and the Lebanese army and the Phalangists and the Murabitun and the Palestinians. It was this kind of incredible array of different fighting forces. And this was often one of the refugee camps after the Israelis had withdrawn. These kids will be kids, and they was. This is in Sri Lanka, they have this really unusual way of fishing, which, people fish all over the world, but, they do it in different ways in different places. And they'll just sit on these poles and, they'll catch the fish pretty quickly, but they'll just sit there for 2 hours in the morning, and then they'll come back in the late afternoon when it's cool, and the fish will come up closer to the shore. And there were 20 or 30 of these fishermen fishing in this one particular area in this method. Yemen. This was the the chief of the Sun, and he was our guide. Went to a wedding and he took his father's AK-47. He started actually shooting this thing off. It's the tradition in Yemen to fire off your gun. And everybody started getting very nervous because he couldn't hold the gun straight. And a folk medicine, folk remedy they chew a mild narcotic and they keep that cod, it's called cod, and they keep it in their jowls for all afternoon. They get like a little bit high out of it. These are some pictures from Africa. This is in Ethiopia. And these are some cattle herders, or kind of cowboys, the Ethiopian cowboys, who will take their herds of cattle out every morning, and then they'll bring them back to these enclosures. And they all go out with their AK-47s. They love to adorn themselves with flowers and jewelry and beads. They have a great style and a kind of innate sense of fashion. I worked on a story on AIDS. There was a part of a group project. In my country I was kind of working in was Vietnam. And I followed 3 or 4 families, and in each case the husband was HIV positive, and they were given this medicine which was supposed to arrest that. And so I tracked the before and then during the process of them taking this medicine. And in 3 or 4 of the cases, the man actually died, but it was only one man that actually survived. This is his wife after he's passed away. This is another man who was very sick. Him and his wife. This is getting a blood test at the hospital. This girl, her husband had died, and we had just gone to the hospital with her, where she was told that she also, that he had infected her. So here she is, this young widow with this young child, and suddenly she realizes she's been told that, yeah, you too, you also have been infected. So here she was completely, as you can imagine, devastated. I worked in the first Gulf War. My sort of approach and the brief was to cover the environmental angle. As you recall, there were maybe 600 oil wells which had been blown up, and this oil was either burning or just flowing, gushing out of the wells. It was really like an end of the world. To drive through Kuwait was like an enormous sort of movie set. Everything was just destroyed, and there was just devastation and carnage everywhere. And this is actually about, I don't know, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And you would go into these oil fields and it would just become like night. It was so dark that you'd actually have to use a tripod or a flash to work. You can see off in the distance, it was just like a moonless night. All these animals which were wandering around looking for food or water. There was this hippo, which had been, I don't know, the Iraqis had let it out to kind of wander around the town. And it was just lost and hungry and thirsty. And these migratory birds, which would travel between Central Asia and Africa, when they got to Kuwait, they would traditionally stop for water. And so they landed on these lakes, but instead of being water, it was all oil. So they all, thousands of them just died. These are some sort of scientists doing some soil samples and whatnot. And they had these protective suits and the gas mask, and I'm just there with my photo vest and my baseball cap. No protection at all, just kind of letting it all, hang out. Kind of switching gears a bit here. I've had a few exhibits in Italy, and I did some travel around for about a month photographing various things to give the exhibition a kind of an Italian angle, or augment the pictures with some pictures from Italy. So this is Venice, kind of an unusual picture from Venice. It's an older picture from Piazza Navona in Rome. Venice again. One of my favorite stories and one of my lifelong passions has been Buddhism and photographing and traveling in Buddhist countries. And I did a story for National Geographic, which this picture was part of. This is from the Shaolin Monastery, which has Buddhist roots. This is, you'll recognize this is one of the concentration camps in Poland, near, not Auschwitz, but near Auschwitz. And I heard that there was a group of Zen practitioners that would go there and do these meditations and these certain practices. So I just went with them and photographed their retreat. These are some monks debating. It looks like they're quarreling or fighting, but actually it's kind of just a very heated debate, and they're getting very physical. But they're not angry, it's just their way of kind of making a point. These are young. These are all in Tibet, which is an incredible experience. Unfortunately now, with all the unrest there, it's difficult. The Chinese have kind of shut it down. for tourism or for travelers or any foreigners, so it's kind of inaccessible. This is a shoeshine boy in Lhasa. You can see his head. It's full of black shoe leather. Really amazing people. They have, again, it's a case of these isolated people, like the people in the Omo Valley in Ethiopia, having their own style, their own sort of sense of fashion. And these are people just kind of literally walking down the street who I met. This woman was in a village, and she was just literally walking by a monastery wall, and I just asked her if I could take her picture. Jim and I have similar stories about 9/11. I was in Tibet on my way back to New York, and I think Jim was in Europe on his way. We both got back to New York on the night of September the 10th. We both woke up in the morning. Jim lives further downtown. I was in the village, and we woke up in the morning and found ourselves, in the city which was under attack. And I actually went up on the roof of my building and started photographing both towers. And within a matter of a few minutes, the first tower collapsed, and I couldn't actually hear it, but there were people in the park below my building, which are all these screams. So this thing is sort of, I could see it through my lens, and all these people screaming. It was and then this is the second tower. Now Jim is right below this part that's falling down on the left, and he was, had the presence of mind to run into a building and escape, because as I saw these buildings collapse, I knew that there were so many people not only in the building, but surrounding the building, the police and the firemen and people just watching, and then suddenly for, I don't know if it was blocks, but the whole area was just pulverized. So we both, as everybody's kind of leaving the scene, we and other photographers, we went in to photograph it, because I think we felt that this had to be documented. There had to be a memory of it. It had to be what happened. Somebody had to record what was going on, what had happened. So we went down and photographed the aftermath. This is so we neither one of us knew we were there. We just kind of bumped into each other, and this is one of the walkways that connected the World Trade Center with the World Financial Center across the street. So I got up the next morning on the 12th at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I decided I had to go back and continue working. So this is 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. The devastation seemed just to go on and on and on. It was hard to see the extent of the damage because there was so much smoke, but it looked as though much of lower Manhattan had been destroyed. Of course, it was just one particular area, but so I went back after a couple months later. I went back to Afghanistan because at that point, everybody knew and realized that the Taliban were behind it and bin Laden and all that. I went back to do a look at Afghanistan after the Taliban were gone, and I was traveling through Bamiyan province, and I came across these two natural stone formations, which I thought, my God, that they look like the World Trade Center. You know, I mean, well, sort of the same kind of shape and all that. So I hung around this area for several days and made this picture. And then NATO and the Brits and Germans and the Turks and so many different nationalities came in to help or to train the Afghan soldiers. There's a series here which I like to talk about because you can see that there were all these good intentions, but this next picture kind of illustrates the point that in our culture, there's a boot camp, and we all know there's a tradition of humiliating soldiers and breaking them down and all that. But an Afghan, to make an Afghan in February crawl through cold mud is just, I mean, these Afghans, their pride and their honor is everything to them, and to be humiliated like that is just not, not part of their culture. And so you can understand if they're kind of treated this way, that this has, you can see how they could just freak out and kill. We wonder why all of our soldiers are being killed by Afghans. Well, this is part of the reason. This is a woman whose mother who's lost her son, and she's there at the presidential palace. This is 1992, trying to get somebody to help her get some information about her son who's been missing. There's a series of sort of mental institutions or insane asylums around Afghanistan. There's one in Herat and Jalalabad and Kabul. And they just put these mentally ill people into these places. This is called Maristun. And they basically, there's no medical staff to speak of, or they just throw them in there and they're just kind of left to fend for themselves. They give them a little bit of food to keep them alive, but that's about it. This man stood in this, I was there for about 2.5 hours, and he didn't move the entire time. We came and went out of this room. He literally stood there motionless. I was with a doctor who spoke his language and went up to him, asked him some questions. The guy wouldn't move, didn't respond. This is on Main Street in Kabul. Jaidim Maiwan is a young Hazara boy who's standing guard in his neighborhood. Couldn't be more than 13 or 14 years old. A candy factory. Guy just spent 12-hour shift underground in a coal mine, and first thing he did when he came out of the shaft was light up a cigarette after breathing all that coal dust for the whole day. This kind of leads up to the conclusion of my talk, but in Afghanistan, it's as a male photographer, it's almost impossible to photograph a woman. It's just culturally unacceptable. It's taboo. So what you're left with, I mean, there's always an exception somewhere, a teacher, a doctor, whatever. But what you're left with is these young girls, which are, that is acceptable, and parents are very happy and willing to let you photograph their young daughters until they reach puberty, but then it shuts down. So I photographed over the years girls in schools. This is a girl with her, which again is fine. The parents are very happy to let you photograph them, but I was in a refugee camp doing a story for National Geographic on the Afghan-Pakistan border in 1984. And I saw this little girl off in the corner of the tent with these really amazing eyes, and she was very beautiful. And I thought, if I approach her straight away, she may refuse, she may be a bit shy, and she may not let me photograph her. So what I decided to do was to photograph some of her classmates first to kind of build up a bit of trust and let her see that this was okay, and the other girls were very willing to be photographed. So after I photographed 2 or 3 of the other girls, I came to her, and she was a bit shy, and she had her hands up to her face, and the teacher said, this is important for the world to know what's going on. We've been driven from our villages, and there's, I don't know, 1 million or 2 million of us living in these refugee camps. So, cooperate and let this guy take your picture. So I moved the camera slightly to the right in order to catch the light on her face. And I made a few frames, not very many. And I knew that this was a powerful picture. I didn't realize it would be on the cover or become what it is today. But it was just, she was looking at me, I think partly curious about, who was this kind of strange guy with this funny camera. It was the first time in her life she had ever been photographed. And she's an orphan. Her parents had been killed in a helicopter gunship attack. And she was a refugee. So she had a very difficult, tragic life right from the beginning. And there had been a fire in the kitchen where she was staying, and her shawl got burned, and her face was a bit dirty. So there's this quality about the picture which is kind of hard to describe, but there's a real honest, kind of authentic sense of dignity or respect, or somehow this very direct gaze, which is as hard as I've ever tried. I've never been able to kind of duplicate that. So this was on the cover of June 1985. And after 9/11, and suddenly when people started wondering about Afghanistan, and people started wondering, well, whatever happened to that Afghan refugee girl? Who is she, and what's her name, and where is she now, and how can we help her? We want to send her money or whatever. So I went back with a film crew, not just to, we were going to do a story on kind of a general story about Afghanistan, but part of our story was to actually go back to where I had photographed her and see if we could get any information. But we got lucky early on. We found the teacher that had been in the classroom that morning, and so we decided to stay with it, and we took her photograph around to hundreds of refugees, asking them if they remembered her. And I knew that we would never find her. I thought this is absolutely an impossibility. Who's going to remember a 12-year-old girl 17 years later? I mean, we don't know her name. We know her tribe. No. So eventually there was, one man came up and said, I know her brother, but he's actually living near Jalalabad, and if you give me some money, I'll go find him. Well, we thought, he'll take the money, we'll never see him again. But we thought, let's not leave any stone unturned. So we gave him the money for transportation, and after a couple days, almost forgetting this guy, he brings back this guy and said, this is Sharbat Gullah's brother. And as soon as we saw him, we thought, oh my God, look at this guy's eyes. This is we're really onto something here. And he said, I have Sharbar Gul out in the car. Do you want to meet her? So we, of course, that was the whole point. We got very excited. So, and I always had this fantasy that she was going to be exactly the same little girl. I didn't think of it. And she'd had that same red shawl on. But she came through the door, and my God, I thought, this is, I was thrilled to see her, but here she is now, she's 30, and, life is difficult there. I mean, the diet and the climate, and we were very careful to check to make sure it was the same girl. I mean, we did all this sort of analysis and all that. But I can't tell you what a miracle it is to get the permission from the husband and from her to be able to photograph her, because it's in this culture, this Pashtun culture, it's impossible. To photograph a woman, a grown woman, is just out of the question. But I think for whatever reason they believed that this was in their interest to allow us to photograph her. So this is her now. She's 30, and this is already, now she's about 40. But we keep in touch with her every month. We've tracked her, we actually bought her a home. This is a school which there was an Afghan girl fund that was created by National Geographic to start a school in her honor in Kabul. So this is this school for girls and girls' education. And so then when we found her, we decided, well, how, I was trying to think of a way I had like one day to make these pictures. And so we decided to ask her to hold a picture of her as a young girl dressed in her traditional burqa. So this was and then it up on the cover of the Geographic again. So I'm hoping, and I think she's very grateful for the assistance she's gotten over the past year since we found her. She's been, there was a settlement and money given to her and her husband for all the usage. As you can imagine, this picture's been reproduced probably, I don't know how many tens or hundreds of millions of times, but she's actually been well compensated, and so her and her family now have a much better life than what they would have had if her husband was a baker in Peshawar, making $1 a day to feed 6 people, if you're going to believe that. I mean, it was the children and some in-laws. So it's a big responsibility to how can you even feed a family with 6 people on $1 a day? Anyway, that's actually the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any questions about. No, I'm fine. Thanks.
If you wouldn't mind waiting until the microphone gets to you to ask your question, this will allow everyone to be able to hear it.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Hi. Okay, thank you for sharing. Your photos are really beautiful. But I also found them very unsettling, sort of morally, So I was sort of wondering, for some of the less high-profile subjects, I know the Afghan girl was compensated, but let's say like the mother and daughter who were begging outside of your taxi cab, have you developed a sort of personal code of ethics for taking those pictures and then sharing those stories with us?
In the case of that picture, they came up to my window. I took two pictures, sort of an instinctual reflex. Light changed. We went on. We thought it was a powerful picture at the magazine. I ended up using it over 2 pages. It's, you're wondering about compensation for the people in the picture, or but please.
Right. No, just sort of, if you can explain like the kind of responsibility you feel, because it is a privilege to go into these places and you navigate them so easily, but your photos are telling stories that are just as much yours as they are theirs. And I wanted to see like how much you thought about each photo you were taking. And
Well, I think it's important to be respectful. As I said earlier, I never, there's a couple different ways of working. I think that if you're trying to show life in this world, many times you have to photograph people without their permission because you're just trying to, the sleeping series or the couple series are just found situations on the street. That's just the way I work. I'm not sure I would want to go up and wake them up and say, mind if I take your picture? To me, I think it's, I don't have any moral problem with those kind of pictures, or the picture of the woman and her child. These are real situations out in the world. I'm just telling their story. I'm showing what the world's like. And you could say that, I don't know. I don't personally have any dilemma about those kind of situations. Yes.
Just the breathtaking pictures. I wonder in how far digital photography has changed your way of working, apart from, and how much then time you invest in post-processing and augmenting or changing colors to make it even more impressive, or whether you try to keep it more as natural as you saw it with your eyes.
I think that it has to be as true. As I mentioned, that one picture got a little bit kind of over the top in terms of saturation. We tried to correct it, but it didn't work. I think it's important to have the picture represent reality. I think there's nothing worse than pictures that are manipulated or photoshopped, to use where the reality becomes sort of hyper and the colors are sort of unreal. So I think that I've always tried to keep the colors as true to as I remember them. When I worked in Kodachrome, I always tried to underexpose a bit to saturate the colors and to give it a rich quality. So I think I do the same with digital photography now. Try and, again, to kind of, I would like muted, dark, kind of saturated color palette. That's the way I kind of like to work. But I don't work any differently now than I think with digital than I did with film. To me, it's pretty much seamless. Yes?
When did you switch to digital?
I think I switched to digital in about 2003 or 4.
Was it a hard switch?
It wasn't that difficult for me. I think it was the part that was difficult in the beginning was just trying to, the storage and the downloading and trying to manage all that. We would burn a lot of the pictures to DVDs. It was all kind of complicated to me in the beginning, but now, of course, after time, you kind of get used to it and figure a system out. So, but now, I take a lot of cards with me into the field, so I almost use the cards like film. just take a bunch of cards. Yeah.
I have two questions. How does staging a photograph play into your profession and overall in your career? And then also, I know that a lot of people use the terms photojournalism and documentary photography interchangeably. Is there a difference, do you find, or how would you define the two?
I think documentary, if somebody's doing books or whatever, and they're doing life as it is, I mean, that's a documentary. I think if you're doing journalism, you're working for a magazine or a newspaper or whatever. As far as staging pictures goes, as a documentary or a photojournalism, you can't stage pictures unless they're a portrait. I mean, if you're shooting a portrait, which I showed many, I think it falls into a different category because clearly it's a collaboration between you. I mean, my portraits are generally people looking into my lens, so I need their cooperation. I need to have them agree and all of that. I think when you are photographing real life as a documentary photographer or a photojournalist, it has to be real. You can't, stage pictures. Or if you do, you have to explain why and the circumstances. So that's there's no ambiguity about that. But does that make, you understand that I don't know, you talk to Jim, is probably could explain the distinction as well, but I think that if you're doing a book on, say, New England, you would do it as a documentary approach, whereas a photojournalist, it's more about newspapers and magazines or maybe television or whatever, something like that. Yeah.
Who was the question?
Thank you, first of all. But I wanted to ask if you find that when you are interacting with these people and you're taking their pictures, do you have kind of a less of an us versus them sort of feel about it, or does the camera allow you to preserve some of that or keep a kind of distance from the people that you're working with? And the second part to the question is also, do you feel that the audiences you're sharing the pictures with have I guess like a closer relationship with the people in the picture or the scenarios in the picture, or does it allow them to distance themselves further from the scenarios that you're capturing?
Well, this question about them and us or me, and I mean this sort of separation you were talking about, I think you want to break that down as much as possible, and I always think that the first thing I want to do when I'm walking around on the street is I don't want to have that disconnect or that separation. I want to feel like I'm part of the environment, I'm part of people on the street I'm engaging with. Even if it's not about pictures, I'm talking to people, I'm in the middle of it instead of being separate. Sometimes I do workshops and I'm with students who will, they photograph at arm's length and they don't want to get in and meet people and talk to people and be part of the street, part of the scene. I think it's important to have that connection and the humanity, whether you're in the Omo Valley or you're in Afghanistan, we're all kind of human, and I don't really see much, the taxi driver in Hong Kong or New York or wherever, they're all basically the same people. They just speak different languages, have different cultures, but they all love their families and want to have a recreation on the weekends, so I don't really see, if I'm in India, I don't feel like I'm in a foreign place necessarily. I still feel that human connection, and I feel very comfortable with them and photographing them and interacting with them. I don't feel that distance.
Yeah, I
Is
guess
there part
that was
two?
sort of my question was, does the camera allow you to help break that down in some ways, or does that provide a distance for you?
No, I don't think it's, I don't see that the camera, I mean, I'm kind of, it helps to, I think photographing and being out there, it helps to engage people. And if I didn't have the camera, I'm not sure I would maybe push it as far as I do. But I think that it helps you to move and to get closer and to talk to people and to want to, interact with them more, perhaps. Yeah.
This is just a two-part question. The first, the color rendition in your photos is so extraordinary, and I understand that part of that's because you use, looks like most of your work is done on slide film. And I was wondering to what extent you make use of filters and polarizers, and especially in your landscape photos. And the second part of that question, which is actually totally unrelated, is for somebody who wants to do what you're doing, and considering how many changes there have been in photojournalism and newspapers in the past decade or so, how would you recommend, or what advice would you offer to somebody looking to break into the field?
Well, I don't use filters at all. I never use filters. I use sometimes protective filters on the lens, but I don't even use really those either now. And I never, but I never really cared that much about color photography, or I think that the main point really is the story, and the color is really incidental, and I don't want the color to get in the way of telling the story, but the story shouldn't be the color. I don't really want to just rely on, color. I think there really has to be more than that. So I'm not really interested so much in color photography. I think the world's in color, so it's natural that, photographing in color and in black and white. Most of the photography was really in black and white up until just fairly recently, maybe in the 50s or whatever, 60s. The part about breaking into photography today, we were talking about that last night. It's changed quite a bit. When we started, there were lots of, well, not lots of, there were never lots of assignments, but there were more assignments than there are today. I mean, now you can, the magazines back in the National Geographic would give you a 4-month assignment or 6-month assignment, or some guys worked on a year on an assignment. Now it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. In the old days, you'd get back-to-back assignments, and now they're using many more photographers. So maybe you get one assignment a year, or one assignment every 2 years. How do you kind of break in? I think you have to work really hard, and there's apart from hard work, there's I mean, a lot of people work hard, but some of the people who get the work are the ones who have talent. And there's, even though you perhaps work hard, you may not, the talent component is the kind of the part that's a little bit tricky, because if you don't have talent, you can still work hard, and you just, but I don't know. It's tough, and I think that there's going to be some people that survive and make it, and there's going to be a lot of people who don't. It's just, there's like musical chairs. There's only so many seats, and there's just not enough jobs to go around. So it's, you have to be really clever and work hard, and it becomes all consuming, pretty much.
So we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Down right here.
Hi.
Unfortunately, our last question.
Thank you for coming. My question is, as in your travels as a photographer, how do you feel that your presence as a Caucasian male from the West has influenced your ability to become intimate with other cultures and being accepted by the culture and society on your job?
I think being a white guy traveling in Afghanistan. I mean, a lot of times these Afghans, they just see all of us as foreigners. And whether you're Japanese or French or Mexican or whatever, we're just, I don't think it's, I never really felt that being a white, being a white guy was, may have helped me in some cases. I don't think it ever, I don't think it's, being in Africa, again, I'm just a guy with a camera. I'm a traveler or a tourist with a camera. I don't think that it's helped me. I don't think they care. I mean, it's just, I worked, all over the world, and I don't think that it's like being a male or a female. I think that being a female photographer will help in certain situations. For instance, in Afghanistan, photographing females, obviously they have a leg up on me for that, and I can't do it, and they can. But even so, even if you're a female photographer, the women in Afghanistan will say, "Yeah, take my picture, but you can't publish it, because if my husband sees it, I'll be in trouble." I don't think that. There's an upside and downside to being a male or a female photographer, like being a white or black or whatever, Oriental. I think it's, I don't think it really, it helps or hurts. I think it's just, do you agree, or do you what's your?
Well, I suppose in my travels, I feel like, traveling as an Asian American in Asian countries, I receive a different experience as a traveler than I would say other people who travel as from America or the UK or Australia. It's just I feel like it's an inherent difference in how people perceive you and how the culture perceives you. So I guess where my question was going was, do you feel that you're able to acquire a high level of intimacy?
Oh, yeah. I think if you respect people, you a bit of humor, maybe directed at yourself, getting people to laugh and to joke and to relax. Everybody loves to laugh and to have a good time. And if you can get into that zone, but respect, I think, is the ultimate. If you have a genuine curiosity about people and you care about people and like people, I think that shows, and then that human connection happens. And it's just, if you have a genuine interest in where you are and talk to people, and I think it's all good. I don't think there's any problem at all. Wherever you are, I just, if you treat people one-on-one equals, and you talk and explain your story and ask I think it's there'll be absolutely no problem. I've actually never had a problem. The only problem, the worst place I can think of to talk about is a place like, Marrakesh, where they just hate photographers and hate cameras and tourists, in fact, So that's, but that's not about me or being white, or you could, if you were there with the camera, they would do the same thing with you, because they want to be paid. They don't like you to be photographed for whatever reason. So that's just the nature. If you were in Burma, it's the easiest place in the world to work. So.
Well, please join me in showing Steve how much we like him and respect him.